Yeah, we back. Yeah, we back. Now, today's going to be a different type of video, Patreon exclusive. This going to come straight out to Patreon, man. This going to be a little taste of when I broke down that article, that hit piece that was put out by the Council on Foreign Relations. And like I mentioned before, we already know the Council on Foreign Relations, that is a think tank, a United States foreign policy think tank. And as you know, it defends Western corporate interests. So they put out this hit piece against Captain Ibrahim Traoré, calling him the Burkina Faso tyrant, an authoritarian dictator, all the standard factory buzzwords, right? And I broke down the article. I went through the entire article. Like I said, the entire video is like 30 minutes long around that time, but we're going to play a little bit of the Patreon exclusive, give y'all a little taste. And like I said, join the Patreon, man, NTD 1814, link in the description, pinned comment at the top. Now, not wasting no time, let's get straight into it. Yeah, we back. Yeah, we back. Patreon exclusive. Now, today we're going to be breaking down the article that came out from the Council on Foreign Relations. If you remember, I dropped that video the other day entitled Ibrahim Traoré Attacked by Western Billionaires and Corporate Elites. Now, the Council on Foreign Relations, like we mentioned before, an American think tank focused on U.S. foreign policy. Its membership includes senior politicians, secretaries of state, CIA directors, bankers, lawyers, professors, corporate directors, CEOs, and prominent media figures, right? A nonprofit organization with long-standing ties to political, corporate, and media elites. So that kind of gives you an idea of the interests and the mentality when it comes to an organization like the Council on Foreign Relations. Yes, they claim to be independent. Yes, they claim to be nonpartisan. But at the end of the day, when many high-ranking members of your organization are also high-ranking government officials and businessmen of certain nations, obviously the interests of those nations are going to be intertwined with the interests of the organization. So that's the first things first off the bat. Now, a few days ago, they dropped a new article entitled, take a look up on the screen, The Cult of Traoré, with the headline, Rather than a beacon of hope, the Burkina Faso tyrant, Ibrahim Traoré, is a pointer to everything that is wrong with the continent. Now, off the bat, as you can see, with the headline, the Burkina Faso tyrant, gave him a nice little nickname, right? And of course, that's deliberate because there are a lot of people who look at the Council on Foreign Relations and many organizations, when they drop an article, when they say something, they believe it has credibility, right? So when you're introduced to somebody for the first time and they're telling you this individual, he's a tyrant, you know, he's an authoritarian, he's a dictator, you know, he commits crimes against humanity, he violates his own citizens, right? All of that is deliberate for the same reasons why when it comes to other leaders, other heads of state who are their allies, who are in line with their interests, they shower them with praise, right? The positive propaganda. They say this man is a model of stability and democracy, right? Even though he could be a whole corrupt sellout, giving away the whole country. But in the international media, they're going to praise him for his positive virtues, right? But if you're somebody who they deem as adversarial to their interests, you get a bunch of negative propaganda associated with your name, right? The Burkina Faso tyrant, the despot, the dictator, the authoritarian, the violator of democracy, the violator of human rights, right? All of that is deliberate. All of that is deliberate. Now, when you look at the author of the article, you see the name Ebenezer Obadare. Now, that's this brother right here, this individual right here. Now, I got a comment in my comment section in regards to this. This person said this: the article that was published by the Council on Foreign Relations to destroy Ibrahim's image was written by a Nigerian. I have nothing against Nigerians. I just wanted to point that fact out. I responded and I said, that is true, but I'm not going to waste my time with the paid mercenary when I know he's not the one calling the shots at the organization, just another paid contractor carrying out the work of someone behind the curtain. Now, that was the first thing I noticed with the article as well. But like I said, all of that is deliberate. They want you distracted. Oh, it's the Nigerian. But no, you have to think, who are the real head honchos at the organization? Is this Nigerian really the big boss man at the organization calling the shots and dictating the narratives? No, right? But that's deliberate to not only slander the captain's image, but also to get us infighting amongst each other, right? So we get distracted by the task at hand and we start going back and forth. Oh, the Nigerian this and the Ivory Coast this. And no, we're not going to fall victim to the traps of the enemy. We can talk about the Nigerian later, right? In private. We can handle that amongst each other, but we're not going to get distracted by that, because that in itself is deliberate. Everything is deliberate. Everything is strategic. Because you see, if the article was published by a random white guy from, Copenhagen, it wouldn't have the same credibility. It wouldn't have credibility. Everybody would be like, why is this random guy in this random country acting like he's an authority when it comes to what's happening in the region, right? So off the rip, the article will be rejected by the author. So you have to put a black face. It's no different than General Langley with the military, right? General Langley is not the one really dictating the plays from up top. That's the Pentagon. That's the military. That's the Secretary of Defense, right? General Langley, he's carrying out orders. He's carrying out his duties, as they say. Same thing with this guy right here. He's not the big boss man at the Council on Foreign Relations. No. But similar to General Langley, right? They're renting out his black face to give credibility to advance their own interests. Now, we can have another conversation about why certain individuals from our race feel so comfortable acting as paid mercenaries on behalf of outsiders and foreigners. That's a different conversation. But like I said, let's not get caught up in the Nigerian author, because like I said, everything is strategic. Everything is deliberate. That was on purpose to have his face on it to make it seem like this is somebody with inside knowledge, right? This is an insider, an African insider, to give it more credibility. Because it wouldn't hit the same if a random white man sitting in Boston, Massachusetts was talking about, oh, this is the Burkina Faso tyrant. They'd be like, bro, get out of here, bro. You're from Boston. But if you're an African, if you're from the continent, they'd be like, oh, man, this might have some credibility. So like I said, propaganda warfare, information warfare. That's why on my videos on YouTube, I didn't focus too much on the Nigerian author. In the grand scheme of things, he's irrelevant, right? He's simply a paid mercenary advancing the interest on someone behind the curtain, like I said. Now, anyways, let's jump into the article, The Cult of Traoré. I haven't read this article, only read a few, bits and pieces, but I wanted to read it fresh with a fresh mind to get a fresh analysis. Anyway, let's get into it. Take a look up on the screen. Against all odds, order for a certain kind of authoritarianism is having a moment in Africa. Off the rip, right? The buzzwords just flying off the page. The tyrant, the authoritarian. Bro, we haven't even made it to the second sentence. He done already smashed on the captain multiple times. Let's continue. Among a cross-section of its intelligentsia and general public, the idea of a lawgiver appears suddenly to be back in good order. The reason behind this infatuation is not difficult to divine. There is, for one thing, understandable frustration with the slow progress of democracy. Okay. You see, the author, decent writer. I haven't heard of him, but apparently this guy done wrote, many books. So naturally, he's a black man who has good skill in writing. You see, they get the skilled among us to carry out these things. Like General Langley, for example, he's probably an excellent general. You're probably one of the best in the world, but they get our best to go out and carry out these jobs as paid mercenaries. But anyway, let's continue. The frustration with the slow progress of democracy, and for another, the weakness of the political leadership, even in those countries where civil rule may be said to have made the most advance. Okay, well, at least he acknowledges that. At least he acknowledges that regardless of whether you're for the captain or against the captain, the current crop of leadership who has taken on these Western models of politics, mainly as they call, democracy, those who have embraced it fully, they haven't been able to show the benefits and the gifts and the fruits of the democracy that they've been evangelizing about. And I think that's something they're going to have to get in order first before they can really levy any criticisms that have any credibility, right? You're going to have to show your work. And those who have been evangelizing about democracy on the continent, they have not shown their work. Under the so-called democracy they've been preaching about, the citizens are still struggling. The people are still unhappy. The politicians are still engaging in corruption. So is it really democracy? It's not really a democracy. Of course, the international community is going to embrace these governments and embrace these leaders because they are conducive to their interests. They're beneficial to their interests. But at the end of the day, is it really democracy or is it really dictatorship in a suit? Civilian dictatorship. But anyways, let's continue. Whatever one's feelings about the political leaders of the immediate post-independence years, there is no arguing that they filled the room and the imagination in a way that many of their contemporary peers simply cannot. An additional factor is amnesia, particularly regarding the ruinous legacy of the military in power, more on which later. If arguably unlike any other era in the region's history, the historical moment favors the emergence of a charismatic lawgiver. No leader epitomizes or speaks to the zeitgeist more than Burkina Faso strongman Ibrahim Traoré. So that's the third buzzword, right? First buzzword, tyrant. Second buzzword, authoritarian. Third buzzword, strongman. Right? Like I said, man, these guys come out of factory with this nonsense. Anyway, let's continue. Like his military brothers in arms across the Sahel and Central Africa, Traoré, who took power in September 2022, has never been shy about his intention to monopolize it. Okay, that's the fourth buzzword. He's monopolizing power, right? Tyrant, authoritarian, strongman, monopolizing power. Let's continue. He has said openly, and just to be sure, incorrectly, that no country has ever developed under democracy. The clearest indication. Now, I'm not sure if the captain ever said that. I've never heard the captain say that. I'm not going to say he's lying, because this is a so-called, credible organization. But I've never heard the captain say that no country has ever developed under democracy. But I'll say this, though. I've said it on previous videos, that when you look at the so-called developed nations, when you look at the so-called rich nations, when they were in the development stage, there was no democracy. It was a bunch of strongmen. It was a bunch of tyrants. It was a bunch of authoritarians. It was a bunch of dictators that were in charge when these nations were in the developmental stage. And in fact, these nations engaged in human trafficking and slavery. So obviously there was no democracy in the developmental stage. But me personally, I've never heard the captain say that, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Now let's continue. He said openly that no country has ever developed under democracy. The clearest indication, if any were needed, that he will not be getting involved in an electoral contest anytime soon. So, okay. First buzzword, the tyrant, the authoritarian, the strongman, monopolizing power. What's it called? Oh, elections, right? As you can see, straight propaganda. Let's continue. Accordingly, Traoré has moved to combine economic populism, both the nationalization of the country's gold mines and reported distribution of free tractors to farmers have earned him plaudits, with political oppression. Okay, now, another buzzwords. Political oppression, right? So the first buzzword, tyrant, authoritarian, strongman, monopolizing power, elections, political oppression. Now, keep in mind, the country is at war, right? The country is at war. So when a nation is at war, the government has to take certain measures that would be deemed unorthodox in order to manage the country while it's at war, right? They got to keep that in mind. But like I said, it doesn't matter. The agenda must go on, right? It doesn't matter if you're at war. It doesn't matter if you're under attack. It doesn't matter. The agenda must go on. We should still disrespect you and slander you and call for elections. Meanwhile, the country is at war. Let's continue. Political oppression, co-opting, or where that is not possible, cracking down on the opposition. Now, that's another buzzword that comes out of these Western think tanks. Cracking down on the opposition. Cracking down on the opposition. Now, why are the Western governments so infatuated with the opposition groups of all these nations, right? You notice when a nation is adversarial to the interests of these certain governments, they always talk about the opposition. The opposition. We have to talk to the opposition. The opposition. We have to hear what the opposition has to say. Why is that? Because it's through the opposition that they're going to promote their interests, right? They're going to start funneling money towards the opposition. They're going to start funneling weapons to the opposition. They're going to start boosting the narrative of the opposition, right? Because when the opposition gets into power, they're going to start signing contracts with the opposition. They're going to start signing agreements with the opposition in return for their favors that they gave to the opposition, right? They funneled money and resources and gave free media press to the opposition. So when they get into power, you have to return that favor, right? You have to give up the mines. You have to give up the contracts. You have to give up your resources. Why? Because we helped you get into power. Right? That's why they always trying to talk the opposition. He's cracking down on the opposition. We have to talk to the opposition. Everything is deliberate. Everything is strategic. And keep in mind, in a lot of developing nations, sometimes being a politician is your road to success, right? That's your career path. So when you're a career politician in a developing nation, you're bound to be corrupt, because all it takes is the adversary, flaunting, $100,000 check in front of you, and you're going to be saying anything on the microphone. You're going to be saying anything in the media. Because you come from nothing, and the only pathway to riches and wealth is politics. So you're going to engage in corruption. You're going to do the bidding of the adversary because you want to drive a Mercedes-Benz. So that's why they always saying we got to talk to the opposition. But most times the opposition has no morals and has no integrity. Sometimes the opposition just wants to get into power so they can sign the country away and drive Mercedes. Let's continue. As a strategy of consolidation, none of these is new or, for experts, unexpected. As historian Samuel Fury Childs Daly reminds us in his timely and important new book. Contrary to the settled impression that the military in power in Africa simply marches to its own beat, in reality, military objectives blur into politics in often unexpected ways, producing a militarism that is neither what the soldiers envisioned nor what their adversaries feared. Soon enough, soldiers in power discover not only that there are numerous unknown gods to propitiate, but they also realize that some of the strings of African politics must be willy-nilly pulled. In the end, what begins as an idealistic assault on power often ends up as a deep and entangling compromise with it, as the rubber of glorious revolutions and martial utopias meets the road of uncharted political landscapes, wayward legislators, implacable civil societies. Having gained power through coercion, the military quickly learns that it takes more than that to keep it. Traoré is not the only African military adventurer quickly learning this lesson and pulling all the stops in a bid to hold on to the reins. Having similarly mounted the saddle on the back of earnest promises to restore sanity to the political space, the regimes in Niger, Mali, Guinea, and Chad have resorted to the same combination of economic populism, constitutional manipulation, and aggressive social pacification. Gabon, where Brice Clotaire Oligui Nguema has just completed a stunning transition from soldier to civilian president in less than 2 years, is an instructive omen. Now, they're talking about the leader in Gabon. He name drops the leader in Gabon, who also came to power in a similar fashion as the captain, right? He took power by force. But of course, it turned out that he was actually the cousin of the previous guy who was in power for how many years? And his father was in power since the 1960s. So it's still the same family. The same family has been ruling the country for over half a century, but this guy is bragging about the stunning transition he made to a civilian president, to a democratically elected president, but the family been in power for more than half a century, right? The captain been in power for like 30 months, not even, right? But you already dropping all the buzzwords on him. But you got praises, you singing the praises of the leader in Gabon who signed. All right, we back. Now, that was only a piece of that video. To get access to the full version, the full 30-minute version, as well as 17 other videos in total, like I said, go join that Patreon, NTD 1814. Join the family. Now, before I get out of here, I want to play a clip from the good brother David Hundean. Since we're on the topic of information warfare, let's get into it.
Because, I mean, look at it. Terrorists marching through the center of a town in Burkina Faso. Same Burkina Faso with the red beret man who's supposed to be doing so well. And hold on, what's this? 2 stories within 2 days of each other reporting 2 other terrorist attacks in Burkina Faso where hundreds of people died. Quotes from analysts in each story saying the same thing, that Burkina Faso's military cannot protect its people and the countries of the Sahel Alliance need to go back to France with their tails between their legs. Let's start from the circumstances surrounding this sudden rash of terror attacks in Burkina Faso. So on May 9, Ibrahim Traoré met Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Victory Day parade in Moscow. This was a few days after AFRICOM soldier who shall remain nameless accused him of using Burkina Faso's gold to protect himself. In addition to meeting Putin and having a series of bilateral discussions, Traoré also gave an interview to RT where he gave Emmanuel Macron and AFRICOM soldier a public spanking. Interestingly, while this was happening, Mr. Macron was meeting in Paris with a former Al-Qaeda commander who once had a $10 million US government bounty on his head, called Mohamed Al-Jalani, who these days is Syria's head of state and is now known in French media as Ahmed al-Sharaa. Next thing you know, Al-Qaeda's North African subsidiary carries out these attacks, and the terrorists carefully videotape themselves tearing down a Burkinabe flag and a Russian flag. They then shoot sporadically at a government installation where literally nobody is around. Then they get on their motorbikes and get the hell out of there. So I checked the map to see where these 3 locations are: the Apadia town, Jibo province, and Norum province. Turns out all 3 are either right next to Burkina Faso's troublesome northern border with Mali, or its southeastern border with Benin, which so happens to host a French military base just 50 kilometers from the border. So apparently these guys swooped in on their motorbikes, carried out a blitz attack, filmed it for maximum effect, and then disappeared. Who's behind the message of doom that you are supposed to get when you see terrorists on motorbikes ripping down flags and carefully videotaping location signposts so that you know that they were there? And why? To answer that question, all you have to do is scroll to the bottom of these stories and check out who was quoted giving expert analysis of these events. So in the first story, you have someone named Beverly Ochieng, an apparent specialist in Sahelian affairs, who comes from the famous Sahelian city of Nairobi, Kenya, which is about 6,000 kilometers southeast of the Sahel. Her glittering qualifications for Sahelian geopolitical analysis and conflict reporting include hosting a podcast about poetry and literature, writing for a Kenyan news website, and knowing how to speak French. experts. And with this glittering CV, who does she work for? Well, it's something called the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is an American think tank, blah, blah, blah. Oh, here's the interesting part. Funded by the American Defense Industry Avengers, Lockheed Martin, General Atomics, Northrop Grumman. So Beverly is essentially acting as the spokesperson of the same establishment that African Soldier comes from. Isn't that interesting? The other story quotes Conflict Armament Research for its expert analysis. So I wonder who these guys are. Let's see, check them out, see who's behind them, and funded by the European Union. The same European Union whose member states, France, believes that Burkina Faso without French domination is like Paris without its rats and constant smell of pee. And what this means is that both stories quoted biased and unreliable sources without disclosing the bias, and then presented these elaborate geopolitical opinion pieces as news. And that, unfortunately, is all too common in journalism. Because that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you manufacture a crisis and use it to achieve political objectives by peddling poison information which locks people into a reality that does not exist. Some call it public opinion management. Others call it mass mind control. Plus ça change.
All right, we back. Now, as you can see, warfare has been waging on all fronts. Physical warfare, propaganda warfare, information warfare, economic warfare, diplomatic warfare, and recently today, I seen a headline saying that the United States is actually moving closer to repositioning their drone base to Ivory Coast, right? Take a look up on the screen. The United States moves closer to establishing its drone base in the West African country. In response to growing instability in the Sahel and shifting geopolitical dynamics in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, the United States is moving to solidify its ties in West Africa with the drone base in Abidjan, that's the capital of Ivory Coast. The United States' interest in establishing a drone base in Côte d'Ivoire has been under discussion since 2024 as Washington looks to reposition its military presence in West Africa following its withdrawal from Niger. While no final decision has been made on constructing a permanent base, advanced talks are ongoing with the Ivorian authorities about expanding U.S. operations, including the potential use of existing Ivorian military facilities for drone deployments. Now, I need to do some more research on this. I need to look into this a bit more, examine it a bit more before I come out with a full, breakdown on it. But in summary, when you hear things like drone base, things like that, a drone base essentially is a surveillance hub. It's just for surveillance. That's what they're going to be doing. They're going to be conducting surveillance in the area for whatever reason, right? Now, the drone base was originally in Niger, but when the military regime came to power, the military told Washington that it's time to go, right? So they had to pack up, they had to go. So now it seems like they're going to reposition themselves in Ivory Coast. And of course, as you already know, I believe Ivory Coast shares a border with Mali and Burkina Faso. So it's right along the border of the AES. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. I just wanted to share that information. And like I said, go join the Patreon, man. Go join the Patreon. NTD 1814. Support the album, Sahel 1816. Go to my homepage, go to my playlist section. Enjoy the album. Cash App in the description. Support the channel. And I'm gone. Peace.
Told me she love me and said that it's real. So independent, ain't signing no deal. Feel like a king and I'm up at Cap Henry. I'm in the citadel, top of the hill. Trying to run up and we let off a cannon. Secret location, I'm keeping it sealed. You ain't retaliate, Franco Medina. Came to the country and he got killed. You ain't retaliate, Rafi Mans. Thought you was loyal, thought you was real. Didn't even want to come pick up the body. Had your man locked up, he died in the cell. Up at the palace, I'm throwing a party. Right on the south and I'm giving them hell. And my little shorty, she looking exotic. African features, she casting a spell. Run to the check like I work on my fitness. Wake up each morning and handle my business. Said that she love me, she want my genetics. Wanna get married and make it official. Wanna get married and have my babies. Up in the city, I'm riding Mercedes. Up in the city, they treat me like royalty. Feeling like Dolph, talking about lords. Spreading my wings and I had to get fly. Up in the top, an incredible vibe. Came from the bottom, I'm up in the sky. Gave one look and said, baby, you fine. Wake up each morning and handle my business. They just be talking, you see me, I live it. Ride on my enemies, sounding like thunder. 1804, got that shit in my spirit. 1804 when I step in the building. 1804, and that's word of my mother. Rock my women and die for my brother. Never gon' fall when I'm deep under pressure. Tell them we back and they better accept it. Move like a king, every step is divine. Ride on my enemies with no exception. Taking revenge and I'm taking what's mine. Pour up a drink and it's time that we toast. Watching my back, keep my enemies close. Only the family, I stick with my brothers. Cannon's position outside of the coast. Heavy artillery for the protection. Move like a general, stick to the code. Feel like a king when I'm up in the north. Beautiful women, they trying to get chose. Launch an invasion all over the south. Capture the capital with all my woes. Look at my enemies. energy and my demeanor. Dripping that ice and that's head to my toes. Lately I'm flexing all on the Americans. Flexing my muscle on missing my road. Just got a carriage just coming from London. Boy, that shit cash, I ain't taking no loans. Boy, that shit cash, that's fresh on the boat. Enemy know I got millions in gold. Enemy know I got choppers and cannons. How did I do it? They can't understand it. How did I do it? It's cause I'm relentless. Call me King Harry, my name is cemented. Call me King Harry, I'm up in the palace. Call me King Harry, I'm raising the status.